Amen. Yeah. Only joking. Not the best way to start a sermon with the end, is it? Not the best way to start a sermon. But a great way to understand John's Gospel. A great way to understand John's Gospel. And you kind of have to understand it by knowing where he's going, by knowing the end of the story. So I'll show you the kind of end of today's points already. We have a little box which says, which are you? I'm sorry I've not got a very good kind of cool way out round angle. And we've got 3 cuts going on here, 1 here. It's going to get messy, isn't it? I apologise if I spit it. 1 here. You. And 1 here. Okay, for those that can't quite see it, we've got empty, full and poured out. Okay, empty, full and poured out. And can I have a volunteer? Come on, Charlotte. Do you know what in my mind I think I'll get Charlotte. Okay, Charlotte, you have to, I've probably done it the wrong way around, you have to fill this one up, okay, the poured out one with the red jug there, and then if you notice it become empty at any point during the sermon, then feel free to fill it again. I would hold it while you're doing it, okay? Feel free to come around the side, because I know what juice and young people are like. The amount of juice I've cleared up in my life, I'm telling you. Okay. So while Charlotte's doing that, I'll explain what we're talking about. So if we can just grab up our little projector or something like that. So yeah, take a seat, and then if you see it get to the end, fill it up. It's not the most perfect analogy because normally that jug would be full and wouldn't have to be refilled, but hopefully we won't have to refill it. So today, yes, we're talking about John's Gospel. And there's going to be 3 points that we're going to be looking at today. 3 cups, 3 points. Empty, full, or poured out. Empty, full, or poured out. And Vitor led us into John's Gospel so wonderfully last week. And today in the structure, we're just going to do a short little overview of John's Gospel to help us understand what we're talking about. And then we're going to get into these 3 points. And as I've already said, we're going to be looking at John 2, 1 to 12, which is the wedding at Cana in Galilee. So let's quickly fly over John's Gospel to give us that understanding of what's the book that we're looking at and what are some of the key points to it. Why do we have a 4th Gospel? We've already gone through 3. If you've ever read the New Testament from the beginning, by the time you've got to John, you've gone, really, again? A 4th time? I've just read the story 3 times. What does John offer that the other 3 don't? Well, what's amazing is he doesn't do what Luke says. He doesn't say, oh, well, I've heard some other accounts, I'm going to give you a real account, a detailed account. He gives a few little examples, a few kind of key things, but goes really deep with those encounters and those examples. And the first time I ever looked at John's Gospel, studying it, was in my A-levels. And someone once said, I can't remember the quote, I wish I could, but they said that John's Gospel was like a river where a child could paddle, but an elephant could swim. And it's the most wonderful way to understand John's Gospel. A river of living water where a child can paddle and an elephant can swim. So of course there's a surface level understanding to John's Gospel. You can read it very easily. I can read it to my children and they can get an understanding of it. But the more you spend time in John and the more you look at it, the more you stare at it, the deeper your understanding of John becomes. Now can anyone do magic 3D magic eye pictures? Can anyone do them? I spent about 10 minutes trying to do this and I finally got it. It looks beautiful on the surface. This is like a nice pretty picture. It's got colours. You could almost possibly see like a little woman at the bottom there. Is that Mary? We're not sure. But if you can go cross-eyed and stare through it, you will see a 3D image pop out. I won't leave it on for too long and I'll bring it back at the end. It's really difficult to... Has no one ever done that magic eye thing where you stare at something like that? Yes. Thank you. A few of you have done it. Good. I'll bring it back up at the end. You can stare at it. There's a beautiful picture of Jesus on the cross. But you have to go cross-eyed. It jumps out like a 3D film. You don't need the glasses. You can do it with your eyes. So John's Gospel, you have to kind of stare at it. You have to spend time in it to get it. Don't worry if you can't. Okay. I'll bring it back later, don't worry. And John's Gospel has these other amazing ways to draw you into the deeper meaning. He hyperlinks, like a Wikipedia page. He has in blue all of these lovely bits that relate back to the Old Testament. These wonderful references that draw you into the whole canon of Scripture. And here are a few of them. The water of life, referencing Ezekiel 47. Resurrection in Daniel. The vine in Ezekiel. These wonderful references that help to draw us in to the story. And he's also got these incredible themes. Wonderful themes running throughout the whole Gospel. That the more you read it, the more that you're able to see them in everything he's talking about. Obviously, as Vitor led us into it last week, that the big who Jesus is, the Logos, the I am, that Jesus is God is such a huge theme. We've got light, water, creation, and then Jesus challenging the Jewish festivals. There's a fascinating idea. But fundamentally, the resurrection is a huge theme, and that's the point of John's Gospel, to get you to know who Jesus is and why he came. So how does he help to bring us into that story? So many of you were staring at that funny, stupid 3D picture, and you couldn't get what on earth it was. And after a while of looking at it, you just think, I can't, it's not for me, I can't do it. And sometimes with the Bible, that can be us as well. We can look at it and we go, I don't understand that bit. And we can go to get help, but maybe we're still struggling. And sometimes we just think, I'm not too sure. Or I'm struggling. Or it's difficult to read. Or have you ever picked up a book that's difficult to read? The amazing thing about John's Gospel is, though it's deep, a child can paddle. And he does it in so many different wonderful ways. But one of the ways is to use this incredible motif of misunderstanding. That he has this incredible literacy style where people in the story get it wrong. Jesus is talking about something, they're like, huh? But we know the end from the beginning. We know the end of the story. We know who Jesus is. We know he died, was resurrected, and came back. And that helps us to understand. So it gives us that wonderful kind of feeling of they're a bit silly. I know what Jesus is talking about, but they don't. But the only reason why we know that is because we know the end from the beginning. But there are these really fun bits throughout John where there's misunderstanding. And Jesus is saying something, and they get confused. It draws you in, and it adds a different dimension to the text. Have you ever sat with someone watching a film and they've seen it before? Have you ever sat with someone and they know all the answers, they've seen it before, and for them it's great, but for you it's really frustrating. And they say, it's okay, this is going to happen. Or I know the end. Sixth Sense is probably the worst film to ever watch that with. For any of you that hasn't seen the film Sixth Sense, it's quite old. There's a spoiler alert, but there's a boy whose father dies, and you see the father throughout the whole film, and you think that the boy is conversing with him, having a relationship with him, until at the end you find out that the father's actually dead, and that the boy can see dead people. That's the famous line of the story, I can see dead people.
Ruined that.
Pardon?
Ruined that.
Sorry, I have. It's an old film. I'm going to ruin John's Gospel for you as well, so I apologise for that. But it can be fun if you're the person that knows, and that's the great thing about these misunderstandings. When you know the answers, when you're the person with the information, you sometimes don't mind being the ruler. Sorry. And we know the end to John's Gospel. We know the end that he is a saviour. And these are some great examples. But I find it really funny, because Jesus comes across as this almost kind of funny, eccentric kind of guy that just doesn't answer the question straight. He gives some weird answer back, and they're like, I just asked you, Jesus, for whatever it was, and you gave me some kind of weird response back. Unfortunately, this sometimes happens in my house. Louise will ask me a simple question like, have you done the tidying up? And I will give a response like, a clean environment is the sign of someone that has a busy mind. But someone that can cope in a busy, messy environment is a sign that someone that has a peaceful, calm mind. All I'm trying to do is to say, I haven't done the tidying up. I'm trying to make an excuse for it. I'm actually trying to be a bit critical and say, I've got a peaceful mind, you haven't. It's a stupid riddle, a stupid way to not answer the question right. But now that you know what I'm doing, it's easier to understand. And that's the great thing about John's Gospel. If we know the end before the beginning, it helps it to be easier to understand. And what's amazing about his Gospel is he gives us the point of his book. He gives us the whole point near the end of why he's written this book. In a way that a child like me can paddle into. He actually writes the purpose of this book. Thank you, John. The purpose of this book. But these things are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, that through believing you may have life in his name. If you know that end, when you read it at the beginning, it puts everything in context. It puts everything in a frame of reference. That means that those funny misunderstandings that the disciples and the Jews and everyone makes throughout John, you're less likely to make because you know why it's written and you know that Jesus dies and comes back to life. So where are we today? Let's get into the wedding at Cana. And that context that I've given you, that being that big kind of picture, is beautifully running throughout this wedding story. We heard a little bit from Vitor last week, and it's clear in this story that John is linking Jesus to the God of creation. There's 7 days, a period of 7 days talked about at the beginning of John's Gospel. There's also 7 names to Jesus. He's named God and a human, Jesus the Nazarene. There's also 7 signs, the wedding being the first. The 6th is Jesus' raising of Lazarus, and the 7th is Jesus' own resurrection. And what's amazing is the wedding at Cana in Galilee takes place on the 3rd day. When was Jesus resurrected? On the 3rd day. It gives us context if we understand Jesus' resurrection. So these are your 3 points for today. Empty, full, or poured out. How does that relate to you? Are you empty, full, or poured out? My wonderful assistant is just pouring back into the poured out cup. Thank you, Charlie. Empty. We've gone from wine to water, we've gone blue. Why is that? Well, the wine has run out at the party. At the wedding, the wine has run out, and that's bad news. For any party, whether you like a drink, whether you like to eat, if something runs out at a party, it's not a good thing, is it? The honour of the host of the party is not going to look so good, and the enjoyment might be affected. No one likes anything to run out. And particularly in a marriage, at a wedding. For any of you in a relationship or a marriage, if something in that marriage starts to dry up or run out, things become really difficult. The party is less fun and the love is harder to find. Weddings should be about abundant love. They should be about celebrations. They should be about overflowing love. Nothing should run empty. But we know that happens, and it certainly happened in this case. And the emptiness directly challenges the host of this party. He has invited people from the town and he wants to put on a good party, and the wine has run out. So what does Jesus do about it? Well, what's a great way is the funny way that he finds out about it, is that his mother tells him. Now, if any of you is a skilled person in any kind of thing, if you're good at cars, good at IT, a doctor, something like that, you'll know that very quickly there'll be lots of social situations where someone will phone you up, or you'll be in a restaurant and someone will say, if there's a doctor here, please can they come and help? And your heart sinks, and you go and have to help. If you're that skilled person, you know you're often the one that always gets called on. And that's what's happened in this situation. The wine has run out, and Jesus' mother says to me, they have no more wine. And what's Jesus' response? He says, woman, now this isn't a disrespectful term, it's okay, it's a respectful term. He says, woman, why do you involve me? He's sitting there at the restaurant, he's a doctor. He's like, I just want to enjoy my meal. Please don't bother me. You're on a plane. I'm going on holiday. Don't ask for a doctor. That kind of idea. Poor old Heather's grinning away. He doesn't want to be bothered. But he gives that funny, hilarious, riddling, misunderstanding response. My hour has not come. What? Dude, your wife right now. We need you to come and sort it out. My hour has not come? What the heck does that mean? He doesn't give a straight answer. But the next bit's amazing. The next bit is so funny. In John 2:5, his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. If you ever wonder whether the New Testament is down on women, what's just happened to her? Jesus' mother has just said, you know what, Jesus is trying to get out of this, but I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. He's going to do something about it. Now, we all know we listen to our mothers. But there's a great example here of almost Jesus' mother leading him. Now, the commentaries talk about it actually being about her faith and her belief. But I love that. Her confidence that Jesus will act. Jesus didn't want the honour of the man to be effective. He didn't want the host of the wedding that he'd been invited to be effective. So he acts. What does he do? Well, nearby there stood 6 stone water jars. What were these water jars? They were pots, big, huge, great big pots for ritual washing, for cleansing of the Jews. And the commentaries talk about this probably being there for Passover, where they would need to be ritually cleansed. They were made of stone to protect from any impurities, and this is a nod to Levitical impurity. But what does Jesus do with this ceremonial pot, with this special holy pot for ritual washing? He changes it. These empty jars are there to simulate, and maybe to show the empty relationship that ritual and the Jewish life had come to have with God. Maybe that the covenant with God was broken and that the way they lived their religious ritual lives was empty. That were whitewashed tombs, that they were giving lip service to God, but underneath they weren't actually in relationship with God. That their sacrifices at the temple were empty. That their rituals were empty without love. Just like a wedding would be empty without wine in those days, it was the life-giving source, the celebration of the party. That emptiness is important. And it's summed up in the next verses where Jesus goes to clear the temple courts. And he talks about clearing the temple and replacing the ritual with something else and rebuilding the temple. But they don't understand that because they don't understand the resurrection. And these two elements of misunderstanding, John 2:4 and John 2:19, are great examples of the emptiness in their understanding about the resurrection, but that we know because we know of Jesus' resurrection. So, point number 2 of the 3, what does he do? What does he do? Does he leave the jars empty? Of course not. He fills the jars. Now, this at this point would have been as offensive as if I took my bag and started smashing up that communion table. Probably not a good idea to do. I was going to bring a hammer with me, but I thought that might just be a little bit too offensive. But this is a big deal. Jesus directly challenged their idea of ritual and religion by filling up these jars. He's defining the religious practice. The Pharisees would have seen this as something deeply disrespectful and a challenge to the law and possibly casting off the law. Because to be washed, spiritual washing, it needed to be pure water. It actually needed to be what they talk about as living water, running water, flowing water. It couldn't be stored water or drawn water. It had to be flowing, living water that could cleanse the Jews. But the jars had been emptied of their importance. They were empty examples of ritual with no love and no relationship. So what does Jesus do? He fills them with a living water. We've seen already in some of their themes, John talks about water a lot. And water is life, isn't it? If you go to the desert, you see water bringing life to dry, empty, arid lands. And that life comes from Jesus. It's Jesus that fills them with water. And these themes go throughout John. There's links to Moses striking the rock and flowing water coming out. There's Jesus talking in John 7:37, come and drink of me, actually drink of me, and living waters will flow. When Jesus is pierced on his death, blood and water flow from him. In Ezekiel 47, as Israel is restored, rivers of flowing water flow from the temple. And in Revelation 21:6 it says, he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. God will fill you up with the water of life in the way that he does things. If you are feeling empty today, he will fill you with his life-giving water. If your relationship is feeling empty today, he will fill you with his life-giving water. And why did God want to stop this emptiness, this dryness at the wedding? Because it's a sign of his covenant love for humanity. In Revelation 21:2-4 it says, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Jesus' water brings life. Death is no more. No more emptiness. Our final point of today, as the wonderful Charla keeps topping up our poured out cup. Which are you? Are you empty, full, or poured out? Poured out. What is in that jar? What is in that pot? What is in that cup? Well, we know Jesus fills it with his living water. We know it's filled with water. But where does the wine come from? What happens there? But if we read John 2:8-9, then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water. He tasted the water that had been turned into wine. At what point does that water turn into wine? Is it water in the pot? Or is it wine in the pot? I think it's water in the pot. And I think it turns into wine in the process of being poured out. That's when it turns into wine. Which is an incredible celebration. When they used to tread grapes for wine, it would be a great celebration. It would be a sign of God's abundant love for humanity. Party celebrating. But we know, because we know the end of the story from the beginning. We know that Jesus dies on the cross. We know that his reference to my hour has not come yet. We know that when he goes into the temple and messes up the temple, why is that verse taken in a weird chronological position? Why are those verses there? In all the other synoptics, when Jesus goes into the temple, it's right at the end of his ministry after 2 or 3 years. Why has John put it so early on? There's no way that chronologically, if Jesus did that, he would be allowed to live for 2 or 3 more years after what he did in the temple by defiling the temple. John has messed around with the chronology on purposely to link it to the fact that Jesus is the new temple, the new tabernacle of love coming to live with his people. And And he's coming to replace ritual with relationship. And from the verses from where he says, "My hour has not come," in 2 John 4, he's referencing his death. But we know that when he's talking about pouring out that wine, we know it's his death that he's talking about. His resurrection and the Holy Spirit being poured out on everyone. The wine is such an incredible image. We know in John 15, the vine, the branches. How are we going to be able to produce fruit? We must be connected to the vine. So being poured out as we close. You're 80% water. As you sit there, you are lovely cups of water. 80% of you is water. But if you accidentally get cut, it doesn't come out water, does it? It comes out red. That's because your water isn't enough to keep you alive. In the same way that Jesus' living water isn't quite enough to save you. You have to accept his death and his resurrection and his blood. You have to be washed, not just in... And the Passover was a release from oppression. The release from Egyptian oppression. Why did he say the temple was going to be destroyed and rebuilt in 3 days? That confused them. They like to take years to do this because he knew his resurrection was coming. But how do we live that poured out in our culture? Because it's so hard. I definitely didn't want to talk about alcohol today, but as a part of our culture, English people get drunk more than most people in the world. It's a part of our culture. And this is nothing against alcohol. I'm not talking about that today. I'm actually talking about being drunk on culture. Revelation 18:3. Dangers of being drunk on culture, Babylon. Just understand this. The dangers of being drunk on the culture of Babylon. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxury. It's so easy to get drunk on this culture that is Babylon that we live in. But we must challenge that. We must allow our creation to respond to Jesus in a different way. To not respond with confusion or misunderstanding or rejection. But as Richard Rachel puts it so beautifully, the poet, the conscious water saw its master and blushed. The water blushed. Our water inside of us should respond to Jesus' death and resurrection. How will creation respond? By living poured out for others. Underneath here, where this has been running into, there's been a reservoir of water that can go on and fill other cups. That's how we live the resurrected life. By being poured out, poured into by the Holy Spirit, by God, by Jesus' blood, but also having that room for it to pour out into others as well. So which are you today? Do you feel empty? Are you stuck in ritualistic worship without relationship? That's fine, we've all been there. Or are you full? Do you feel like you're calm, you feel filled up, and you get to know God, and you're getting things in you? But is that good as well? It's important to be filled with the living water of God, but if it's not going anywhere, then are we just keeping it for ourselves? Or are we poured out? Is the point of this wedding story that Jesus didn't just leave the water or the wine in the pots, he poured it out as a celebration across the whole feast. So how will your creation respond? In application, some of you here in positions can speak truth to power. That's one way that we can respond. Like Jesus did in the temple, to challenge the oppression of wealth and power. What institutions do you need to break up that you're associated with? Where people have become drunk on their culture, drunk on a Babylonian oppression that puts human beings on an altered level, where some are better than others. What do you need to challenge and break down? What story do you need to end so that Jesus' story can begin? Or how do you make a hole in your life to allow Jesus' love and Holy Spirit to flow out of? We're going to finish there in prayer. Of those three parts, of those three empty, full and poured out, at that wonderful wedding feast, Jesus wanted them to understand that his hour hadn't come, that they would get the full understanding of that poured out love at the death and resurrection. But we can only do it if we accept relationship with him and we frame all of our life in the purpose of the gospel, that Jesus is the Messiah and that he died to give us life and life for those around us. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, Heavenly Father, thank you so much that you speak to us, Lord. That you are a God of love, a God of relationship, a God of marriage. That you came down from heaven to commit to that covenant as a sign of your love for us. But that you took it a step further. That you loved us so much that you enabled yourself to be poured out. That you knew by locating yourself in a time and place, Jesus, that that was a limited expression of your love. But by dying, being resurrected, your Holy Spirit being poured out, that every human being has the full, abundant access to your love. Lord God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, we thank you so much for every life in this room, Lord. Whether we feel empty, whether we feel full up and a bit overwhelmed, or whether we want to be a part of being poured out into our community and those around us. Be the power. Help us to know that when our cup runs dry, it's you that's filling it up, not us. Pour your Holy Spirit out on all and everyone here in your mighty name.